You know what's fucking wild? Right now, as you're watching this, the entire global financial system, every dollar in your bank account, every stock in your portfolio, every government bond backing the world's reserve currencies is held together by the economic equivalent of a pinky promise. I'm not being dramatic, I'm being precise. The modern economy doesn't run on gold, it doesn't run on assets, it runs on confidence. And confidence, when you really think about it, is just a fancy word for trust me, bro. Let me show you exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. In 1971, something happened that most people have never heard of, but it changed everything. President Nixon walked up to a podium and announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. Just like that, no more gold standard. The decision was supposed to be temporary. 54 years later, we're still waiting for that temporary fix to end. Before that moment, your dollar was backed by something real. If you had a $100 bill, the U.S. government was legally obligated to exchange it for a specific amount of gold. That's what backed by gold actually meant. There was an anchor, a floor, a thing. After 1971, your dollar is backed by the idea that other people will accept your dollar. That's it. That's the whole thing. And here's where it gets absolutely fucking absurd. This system works better than the old one. At least, it has so far. Let's talk about what money actually is now, because most people still think of it wrong. You've probably heard the term fiat currency. It sounds fancy, technical. It comes from Latin. Fiat means let it be done. Basically, the government says, this is money, and boom, it's money. There's no gold vault, no warehouse full of silver bars, just a collective agreement that these pieces of paper, or more often these digital numbers on a screen, represent value. But here's the uncomfortable part nobody talks about. Every fiat currency in history has eventually failed. Every single one. The Roman denarius, the Chinese yuan during the Yuan dynasty, the German poppy mark, the Zimbabwean dollar. All of them collapsed because at some point, people stopped believing. Now, does that mean the US dollar is about to collapse? No, but it does mean we're all participating in the longest-running game of musical chairs in human history, and we're just hoping the music doesn't stop.
Here's how the modern system actually works, step by step, in a way that'll probably piss you off. The Federal Reserve, which, by the way, isn't actually federal and has no reserves, controls the money supply. When the government needs money, it doesn't just print it like you think. The Treasury issues bonds. The Fed buys those bonds by creating new money out of thin air, literally. They add digital zeros to an account. This new money enters the economy through banks. Banks are required to keep only a fraction of deposits on hand. This is called fractional reserve banking. If you deposit $1,000, the bank might keep $100 and loan out $900. Then that $900 gets deposited somewhere else, and that bank keeps $90 and loans out $810. The cycle continues. By the time this process plays out, your original $1,000 has become $8,000 or $9,000 in the total money supply. Money multiplied through debt. All of it based on the assumption that not everyone will want their cash at the same time. You see the problem, right? In March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in less than 48 hours. It was the second largest bank failure in U.S. history. What happened? Depositors got spooked, started withdrawing funds, and the bank didn't have enough liquid assets to cover the withdrawals. Classic bank run. But here's the thing that should scare you. SVB wasn't doing anything unusual. They were playing by the same rules as every other bank. They just got unlucky with timing and investor panic. The government stepped in, guaranteed all deposits even beyond the FDIC limit of $250,000, and stopped the bleeding. Crisis averted. But what actually happened there? The system worked because the government said, "Trust us, we'll cover it." Trust me, bro, economics in action. Let's zoom out further because it gets even weirder at the global level. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. That means when countries trade with each other, when Japan buys oil from Saudi Arabia, when Germany sells cars to China, they usually settle those transactions in dollars. Not yen, not euros. Dollars. Why? Because after World War II, the US had the strongest economy and the most gold, so everyone agreed to use the dollar. Then we left the gold standard, but everyone just kept using dollars anyway because everyone else was using dollars. This creates something called the exorbitant privilege. The US can print money to pay its debts because the world needs dollars for trade. We export inflation. Other countries have to buy our debt to get dollars, which means we can borrow at lower interest rates than we probably should be able to. It's the ultimate trust me bro arrangement, and it's worth trillions of dollars to the American economy. But here's where the math gets uncomfortable. The U.S. national debt is currently over $36 trillion. That's trillion with a T. The annual interest payment on that debt is now over $1 trillion per year. Just the interest. That's more than the defense budget. How do we pay that interest? We borrow more money. We issue more bonds. The Fed buys some of them by creating more money. The cycle continues. This is called debt monetization, and it's exactly what destroyed currencies in places like Weimar Germany and Venezuela. The difference is that we're the reserve currency, so we can get away with it longer. But longer doesn't mean forever. Let's talk about what happens when trust breaks. In 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. It had been around for 158 years. It survived the Great Depression, multiple wars, countless recessions. Then, in the matter of days, it was gone. Why? Because credit markets froze. Banks stopped trusting each other. If Bank A doesn't trust that Bank B can pay back an overnight loan, the whole system seizes up. And it almost did. The Federal Reserve and Treasury stepped in with the largest financial bailout in history. $700 billion in TARP funds, eventually trillions more in various programs. They literally created money to save the banking system.
And it worked. Sort of. The economy didn't collapse, but we never really fixed the underlying issues. We just papered over them with more debt and more printed money. The response to 2008 taught everyone, governments, banks, investors, that when shit hits the fan, central banks will print money to solve the problem. This is called moral hazard. It means people take bigger risks because they know they'll get bailed out. Fast forward to 2020. COVID hits. The economy shuts down. What's the response? Print money. Lots of it. The Fed's balance sheet went from $4 trillion to $9 trillion in a matter of months. Stimulus checks, PPP loans, enhanced unemployment. Just create the money and hand it out. Again, it worked in the short term. We avoided a complete collapse. But we also ignited the worst inflation in 40 years.
Here's the irony nobody wants to acknowledge. Inflation is a feature, not a bug. If you have debt, and governments have massive debt, inflation helps you. Your debt is in yesterday's dollars, but you pay it back in today's cheaper dollars. It's a stealth tax on savers and a gift to borrowers. The Fed's official target is 2% inflation per year. That sounds small. It's not. At 2% annual inflation, the dollar loses half its value every 35 years. Your $100 today will buy what $50 buys in 2061. This is by design. Moderate inflation encourages spending and investment instead of hoarding cash. It keeps the economy moving. But it also means your savings are constantly being eroded. You're being slowly screwed by design, and most people don't even realize it. So what happens if people stop trusting the dollar? We're starting to see cracks. Countries like China and Russia have been trying to reduce their dependence on the dollar for years. They're doing bilateral trade deals in their own currencies. They're accumulating gold. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have been discussing alternatives to the dollar-dominated system. None of this has worked yet. The dollar is still king,
But the attempts are real, and they're accelerating. If the dollar loses its reserve status, the U.S. loses its exorbitant privilege. We can't export inflation anymore. Interest rates would spike. The national debt becomes unsustainable. We'd be forced into austerity or hyperinflation. That's the nightmare scenario, and it's not impossible. Here's what makes this whole thing even more absurd. Cryptocurrency tried to solve this problem and somehow made it worse. Bitcoin was created in 2009 specifically in response to the financial crisis. The idea was simple: create a currency that nobody controls, that can't be printed at will, that's based on math instead of trust. And what happened? Bitcoin became the most speculative, volatile, trust-based asset in existence. Its value comes entirely from people believing it has value. There's no cash flow, no dividends, no intrinsic use, just pure belief. You can criticize the dollar all you want, but at least you can pay your taxes with it. The U.S. government accepts it. That creates a floor of demand. Bitcoin has no such floor. The crypto space promised to eliminate Trust Me Bro economics and replaced it with Trust Me Bro, but with blockchain. Let's bring this back to what it means for you. Your wealth, whether it's in cash, stocks, bonds, or real estate, is denominated in a currency that's backed by trust. Your bank account is protected by a government guarantee that's backed by the government's ability to tax and print money. Your retirement account is invested in companies whose values are based on future earnings paid in that same currency. Everything is connected. Everything is based on confidence. This doesn't mean the system will collapse tomorrow. It probably won't. The incentives for everyone to keep believing are enormous. The U.S. economy is still the largest in the world. The dollar is still the most liquid currency. The alternatives are worse. But it does mean you're participating in a system that has no hard anchor, no emergency brake, no guaranteed floor. The whole thing runs on vibes.
Here's the part that should keep you up at night. This system requires constant growth. Debt-based money systems need inflation and expansion to function. If the economy stops growing, the debt burden becomes crushing. Defaults cascade. Trust breaks. So we're trapped in a cycle where we have to keep expanding, keep borrowing, keep printing, or the whole thing falls apart. And we're doing this on a planet with finite resources. Eventually, something has to give. The question isn't if, it's when and what it looks like when it happens. The smartest people in finance will tell you that central banks have tools to manage all this. They can raise interest rates to fight inflation, lower them to stimulate growth, adjust reserve requirements, implement quantitative easing or tightening. And they're right. These tools exist. They work. But here's what they don't tell you. All of these tools are still based on confidence. Raising interest rates works because people trust that higher rates mean the currency is more valuable. Quantitative easing works because people trust that the central bank knows what it's doing. It's trust all the way down. In 2011, Standard & Poor's downgraded the U.S. credit rating from AAA to AA+ for the first time in history. You know what happened to U.S. Treasury yields? They went down. Investors responded to a credit downgrade by buying more U.S. debt. Why? Because even with a downgrade, U.S. Treasuries were still considered the safest asset in the world. There was nowhere else to go. That's the ultimate proof of how deep the Trust Me Bro system runs. Even when a major ratings agency says, maybe you shouldn't trust this as much, people trust it more. Here's the thing that makes this topic so difficult to talk about. Criticizing the system sounds like conspiracy theory nonsense, even when you're stating basic facts. The money supply is created through debt? True. Central banks can create unlimited money? True. Fiat currencies have a long-term failure rate of 100%. True. The whole system requires constant trust and confidence. True. But string those facts together and people think you're a gold bug or a crypto bro or some kind of economic doomer. The reality is more complicated and more boring. The system works until it doesn't. Trust is real until it's not. And nobody knows where the breaking point is because we've never been here before.
We're running the largest economic experiment in human history. Never before have all major global currencies been fiat currencies at the same time. Never before has the world been this interconnected and financialized. Never before have central banks had this much power and operated with this much coordination. Maybe it works forever. Maybe we've figured out how to create perpetual prosperity through managed monetary policy. Maybe trust really is enough. Or maybe we're just in the middle of the longest trust me bro in history, and the punchline hasn't hit yet.
So where does that leave you? You can't opt out. You can't just refuse to use money. Even if you buy gold or Bitcoin or real estate, you're still measuring your wealth in dollars. You're still participating. The only real choice you have is to understand the game you're playing. Know that your dollars are backed by nothing but collective agreement. Know that the system requires constant growth and inflation. Know that trust is the only thing holding it together. And then decide what you do with that information. Because the economy might run on trust me, bro, but your financial decisions don't have to. The uncomfortable truth is this: the system works because we believe it works, and it stops working the moment we stop believing. That's not a prediction, it's just how it is. The question isn't whether you trust the system, the question is whether you understand what you're trusting, and what happens if that trust breaks. And nobody, not the Fed, not the Treasury, not the economists, not the bankers, nobody actually knows the answer to that. We're all just hoping we figure it out before we have to find out.